let me talk about the mobile market and trends and developments in this market. The first thing about the market, of course, is that it's in turmoil. Things are changing, and they're changing very, very fast. So if you were the king of the hill yesterday, the fact that you will remain the king of the hill today or tomorrow is not guaranteed under any set of circumstances. And we'll look at some of the issues that actually lead to that kind of thinking. The first question that comes to mind is, how should we deal with innovation in society, right? Should any market player, even the mighty operator, should any market player be allowed to act as a gating factor for innovation coming to the marketplace? How should we address the legitimate aspirations of new entrants, right? How do we manage change without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And finally, should business models that were conceived of in the last millennia, which many of you would remember was the millennia of the Magna Carta, right? Should those business models hold true or be expected to hold true to the second coming of Christ? Or will this business model, or should these business models change? Because business models, as we all understand, are reflections of technological order that obtains in a society at a given point in time. So as the technological order shifts, shouldn't the business model too, and those who had a lot of power in the last go-round, in the last technological order and the business model that was born in that context, should they not rethink their business models going forward? The point here is that, and the operators make this point and make this point very well and rather validly, which is that just because the network cedes some control, it should not be construed to mean that the network cedes all control. And that's a very fair point. At the end of the day, you may activate your phone through iTunes, but if the network does not oblige, it's really a very nice paperweight in your pocket or on the desk, right? So the network, just because it ceded some control, does not or should not be construed to mean that it has ceded all control, right? So that's one way of looking at the network. Yes, we have ceded some control, but we are still in charge. The other side of the equation, of course, is a fundamental questioning of what is a network. So you can have one view of the network, which is it's a technological construct full of cables and towers and switches and all kinds of equipment which all these infrastructure vendors provide you. And therefore, because it's your little collection of all this hardware, you have the right to whether or not provide me access, and that will define everything else. So if you look at the operator, and those who kind of think the operator has to roll over and die because it has to roll over and die, they will say that, well, the problem for the operator is that investment is in infrastructure, but the revenue is in applications and services. There are powerful new entrants in the converged digital marketplace, and unlike the operators, these guys are not national in geographical scope of their functioning, so they are global. So obviously they're inviting talent, both financial and intellectual, to the enterprise from all over the world. And then, of course, the issue that the advances in technology and the advances in device technologies particularly are leading to the undermining of the control paradigm that anchored the operator's universe till very recently. Networks are in a state of turmoil, different parts of the world. And then you have the question of, do you build or acquire, as in the case of AT&T's efforts with respect to T-Mobile, because it's not only a question of you get a lot of acquisitions and the rollout of the network becomes easier, it is also that you improve your spectrum assets, right? So it's a very interesting sort of approach to positioning yourself for the future. And then there's a question of what happens when you want to build a wholesale broadband network, as in the case of LightSquare, right? In convergence, what happens is a collision of worldviews, right? How should one think about financing this experiment called mobility, right? Who owns the customer? Very, very important, right? And that's a big struggle. I mean, when you think about mobile commerce, for instance, part of the reason that this mobile financial services are not taking off is that the bank wants to own the customer, Visa and the other platform players want to own the customer, the handset vendors like Nokia and Apple want to own the customer, and then you have the operator who wants to own the customer, and of course the banks, of course. Did I mention the banks? Yes. So all of these people are wanting to own the customer, and that becomes a huge challenge unto itself, right? The second problem that convergence brings to the fore is that leading players are acquiring core assets, right? To sort of, which they deem very important for their continued survival in the future. Now, you can acquire these assets straight out as in acquisitions, or you can form alliances. They're all trying to sort of dominate in the ecosystem and raise their influence across the thing, right? So key mobile technology trends in terms of devices. So we talked about networks, we talked about the general market. Let's talk about some devices. Device capabilities are going up mostly because of the rise of smartphones, although the feature phones are also becoming, getting better capabilities, right? The thing about smartphones which is important to understand is that they support third-party applications, because the higher level operating system, the difference between a smartphone and a feature phone is conceived of as smartphones having the higher level operating system that supports third-party applications, which basically means new entrants can now come in without a huge investment. And then you have Android. The beauty of Android is that it has powered so many different vendors across the board. Not merely here in the US or in the global arena, the big names that we know, but there's a whole bunch of Chinese and Taiwanese vendors that you have never heard of. And they're working off of Android, and they're being able to sort of bring in these capabilities onto devices, taking the price further down for these devices in emerging markets. Location becomes very important. Commerce, it still is a huge problem, but it's gaining salience as NFC becomes a more legitimate enterprise after 7 years of trials. And then as the world goes to a digital universe, the issue of security becomes very, very important, right? Other industry trends, the rise of the App Store, and the argument that you don't need applications. The mobile web doesn't need an application. So here's a huge clash in worldviews, right? So folks at Apple think that the App Store is the way to go. Applications are the way to go. And folks at Waterloo think that the mobile web may do very well, thank you very much, without the App Store. It's a very different orientation to how the world will engage with information out there. Then, of course, you have a very different argument about the fact that we are only thinking in terms of human beings. The connectivity is going to be required by a whole bunch of machines, and so M2M becomes very important over time. Look at these wonderful device form factors and wonderful devices, and look at the brands out there. Do you recognize any of those? All of these are brands from India. And how do you think these brands come about? Thanks to the Chinese and Taiwanese ODMs, right? They're leading to these national brands, and these guys are taking the price point so low that I had an executive once tell me, we will not follow price down the rabbit hole. And I kind of said, have you been to India? And these guys are going to go to Africa. And they're going to go to the Middle East, and they're going to go to every emerging economy. Because I cannot believe that people will be able to afford a $100 phone, right? But if you do believe that these are important, they're important for a particular reason. And that reason is that, can they attract developers to the platform? These are the guys who really matter, right? So the more easy it is to use your platform for a developer. I once was talking to Nokia, and I told them, you have a problem, not because Symbian is good or bad, but your judgment that we should have a developers conference in Monaco. That's the problem. Do you know how expensive it is for a developer to reach Monaco? That €100 ride from Nice to Monaco, right? These guys are not very rich. You want to sort of attract more and more people, make it easy for them, make it cheaper for them, right? So a lot of very good work done by these folks, not only with respect to technology, but also with respect to the business model, right? One more example. Everybody's talking about financial services, right? And everybody wants their own brand and there's a big fight over it. Comes along somebody like Ericsson and says, you know what? I work in 140 countries. I have 270 operators as clients. Let me white label it so that these guys can sort of work together. So these guys provide a tremendous amount of talent into the system. And I'm sure that in the sessions on infrastructure, a lot of this will be discussed over time. So parting thoughts. First, the struggle is essentially between the old and the new. Old business models, old technologies, new business models, new technologies, new ways of defining and redefining, right? As a result, network operators have to rethink their business models, right? But even as the network operators are rethinking business models, the new entrants have to be cognizant that these incumbents are extremely powerful players and valuable players, valuable to society, right? And one should never underestimate them. Convergence, blurring of sectoral boundaries is going to drive as much collaboration and alliances as competition and conflict, because you're now trying to provide content in the same space, right? Then the issue is the mobile value chain is being reconstituted, and as a result of it, you are going to see a lot of alliances and a lot of mergers take place. The big ones everybody knows about, but there's a whole bunch of small ones. It would be very interesting, I keep telling myself that it should be a fun thing to do, to sit down and look at what has Microsoft acquired over the last 10 years, or for that matter, what has Google acquired over the last 10 years, or Apple, or who have you, and you will see how they are building competencies, and we'll see this go on, because the ecosystem is so vast that no one player can run it, own it, control it.